Hello and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. We have a special guest on today. His name is Jeff Diehl, and he's running for governor of Massachusetts. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Gail. Elliot, appreciate it.
We're very happy to have Jeff on. We're trying to interview as many candidates running for state office as we can. So this is just the beginning. We hope to do it after the primaries so then we can get really down to brass tacks. One of the first questions I want to ask you about is this smart growth program that seems to be going all over Massachusetts. And what's that going to do to the freedom of mobility for Americans to choose where they live?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because right now we're having a housing crisis all across Massachusetts. Affordability in Massachusetts is a key factor, I think, in this coming election cycle and who can address the needs of affordability where they live. I mean, we had 50,000 people leave Massachusetts this last year alone because I think there's a lot of issues as far as what they can afford to live. We've got high inflation, obviously. Gas is through the roof right now, and interest rates are rising. So being able to purchase a home, have a mortgage, is getting more and more expensive. How can we create that smart growth to provide the housing, but in a way that people can afford it? I was actually just in Nantucket yesterday, and they've got major issues because it's an island, and there's a lot of land that gets bought up into protected trust. So they're trying to preserve and conserve a lot of the land without building. But the problem is they've got a situation where they need 46 teachers for their school, their high school, and there's no place that they can afford to live over there. The average home value is about $3.5 million. The average rental is about $3,000 to $4,000 a month. So they're having a real crisis with that thing. So smart growth is important. What Governor Baker's done, and I think it's actually a good intention here, is to create incentivized development around regional transportation. So train stations, for example. If there's land near train stations, what you can do is try to incentivize development of that with multifamily housing, where it would be lower cost and you could get people to move there, be able to get on a train line to and from, let's say, Boston, for example. I live down on the South Shore, so the town of Whitman. If you guys remember, or maybe you don't or don't know, it's the home of the Toll House cookie. And so it's great. Yep. And it's just a blue-collar town. My wife and I, we own a small business in the neighboring town of Hanson, right near a train station as well, by the way. And so what happens is the towns are being incentivized to develop those areas and create opportunities for people. So if, for example, they can't afford a car right now, they could at least live in a place where they could get to and from work. I think the one downside to the smart growth plan is that in some of the suburban areas, like in Hanson, the town next to Whitman where I live, there's not a lot of sidewalks. People take for granted that some of the urban areas have sidewalks. They have public transportation, buses, things like the Ride. In a lot of suburban areas across the state, those towns, even on a train line, don't necessarily have the support for people who don't have transportation available to them. So you need to build out infrastructure as part of this plan. So saying that you're going to allow for permitting of smart growth is one step. I think the state needs to step up and help fund the expansion of infrastructure within those suburban towns that need that additional support for mobility. So it's a great overall plan, and one of the things I'm in favor of, I think most candidates running for governor at this point are in favor of, is expanding the or finalizing the east-west rail so that we can, again, stop the housing crunch on the east coast of Massachusetts, and allow people to maybe live a little further away from Boston if they're working in Boston. But the other thing about the pandemic that we learned too is that people don't necessarily have to, be in the city to work all the time. They can work remotely. So I think that will also help alleviate some of the housing cost and some of the growth around the rest of the state. By the way, I know before we came on the air, you said to keep my answers short, and I've broken your rule right off the bat, so I apologize.
You're in trouble.
It's an interesting subject, and I just wanted to make sure I thoroughly addressed it.
Okay.
This one hopefully will be short. I have a little pet peeve, okay? For years, anybody who works in the North Shore has to pay a toll to go over the Mystic Bridge. People on the South Shore pay no toll for coming in.
I live on the South Shore.
I understand that, but that's why this is a really relevant question.
How about the people that work east-west, right, on the Pike? don't think that it's fair to keep paying that.
Well, see, that's the problem. Why are we being punished for living on the North Shore? The state has plenty of money. Now, I've asked our state rep and I've asked our state senator, and I got two different answers. One answer was, well, the federal government won't let us add any more taxes, and the other one was, we're working on a plan to put taxes on the South Shore side, on the distress way. My question, I'm not
Did you
asking
say
you
the
to...
distress way? With the backup, some days it does feel like a distress
Right.
way
So,
instead of an express
I mean,
way.
I'm not asking to put tolls on. I'm asking to take ours off. Give us a break. We pay a sales tax on the car. We pay a gas tax,
Excise tax.
excise tax, because, and we won't get rid of the gas tax, even with gas the way it is. Can we get rid of the tolls on the Mystic Bridge?
So it's an interesting discussion that's been brought up many times, especially Republicans on Beacon Hill try to say that, the original intent with the Mass Pike, for example, was that once it was built, it was supposed to retire the tolls. But then they say that it needs to continue to be tolled in order to maintain the roadway. Now, back in 2014, I led the repeal of the indexing of our state gas tax to inflation. In 2013, Deval Patrick had put an $8 billion tax package together, and part of that was to index our gas tax to go up every year automatically without a vote by the legislature, and it was going to be tied to CPI, or Consumer Price Index. Right now, we're somewhere between 8 and 10% inflation this year. It's just out of control. If you think gas is expensive now, if we had kept our gas tied to inflation, it would have been outrageous. So I led a repeal effort in 2014, and we undid that law, which was a good start. But like you're saying, one of the things we talked about during that ballot question was the fact that the state does have plenty of revenue. Right now, we're collecting almost $3 billion in excess tax revenue beyond what they expect they needed to run the state. We should be returning that back to the taxpayers in creative ways. But what we're not doing is temporarily lifting the gas tax like other states are to try to help with this $5, $6, $7 gas per gallon. It's outrageous right now, and it's hurting families, it's hurting businesses, it's just hurting us in general. We're trying to recover from the pandemic, and our costs are through the roof. Food is increased because of that. The availability, the supply chain issues are a factor. So we're going through an economic time, and Beacon Hill seems to be non-responsive. So to get back to your question, I do think that we should be looking at retiring the tax on certain roadways if we can say it's been built, it's done. I do understand that we have to maintain our roadways. I get that. But I do think the state collects enough in revenue, plenty of ways we collect revenue for transportation that could be put towards that maintenance of the roads. So yes, I'm looking for ways to try to return money. I always have. I was elected in 2010 to serve as a state representative for my town of Whitman and Abington and East Bridgewater. And I've always been fighting for, us, the consumer, the average taxpayer, to make sure that Beacon Hill does listen and doesn't continue to always raise taxes on us whenever they see fit.
I want to ask you about the recently passed bill to give driver's licenses to illegals. And is this the first step in giving them the right to vote?
It's interesting because it's been a bill that's tried to make its way out of the legislature for a while, and they're doing it right now, at a time when I think, again, people are very upset with the way things have been handled for a while on Beacon Hill. We were the last state house to open. I don't think legislators have really been listening to the people of our state. The pandemic shut everything down. My wife's business and my business was shut down. When we reopened, it was on an arbitrary schedule. 40% of restaurants never reopened. People were incentivized to stay home. So, there's a lot of question as to why people on Beacon Hill didn't stand up for our rights back then. And now what they're doing is providing, their first big piece of legislation they're going to move before the end of this session is going to be giving people who are not here legally a driver's license. And as you said, there is a link to voting. And Governor Baker actually vetoed this bill because he said in 2020, the state changed our laws so that anybody who applied for and got a driver's license would be automatically registered to vote, in their local towns. And that's why one of the big reasons that he vetoed this bill, he said it's basically giving a non-citizen the access to vote in the state, which they're not supposed to do. And I think this is a state where I know there's a lot of very liberal thought on Beacon Hill that's right, but I think our country is founded on the fact that it should be citizens who've done the process. I'm all for immigration. People come here, become a citizen, they have that right to vote. But if you're here illegally, you're being incentivized now by being given a driver's license, which, by the way, is also a valid ID now for the rest of the country. When you go around the country, it's not just Massachusetts. That'll be an ID around the rest of the country, and that really basically weakens the value or the security of our own licenses by doing that. I guess the other factor too is that the RMV is the one who's in charge now of determining the documentation that
Right.
decides whether you get that license. We have an RMV who failed to process over, I think it was 50,000 out-of-state violations, leading to the death of 7 motorcyclists in New Hampshire by somebody who
Oh, right. I remember
should have had
that.
his license pulled.
Yeah.
We have an RMV that just about 6 months ago issued over 2,000 licenses to people without taking the driver's test. So our RMV already seems to be unable to do their job correctly as it is. And I'm not trying to criticize everybody at the RMV, but why are we going to put a very critical role that normally is handled with passports and, federally, verifying documentation to prove that somebody is who they say they are, now in the hands of the state RMV? Seems like it's got a lot of potential flaws in it. And again, the fact that it could lead to people who are here illegally actually voting seems to be one of the biggest concerns that people have right now. The good news is there is a group that's being formed right now to put a ballot question out there by November, for the November 8th election, the general election in November, that would repeal that. So what has to happen is we have to get 40,000 signatures to get that on the ballot. So there's a team in place that's actually working to file the language and get the signatures. And if we get the 40,000 signatures, we can have the people of Massachusetts decide. And just the one last thing I'll say about this is that there was polling done on this to see what people in Massachusetts thought about it in general. It is overwhelmingly negative against providing driver's licenses for illegal. So I would assume that the voters will ultimately vote to repeal what the legislature just did. But the fact that Beacon Hill is still acting in such a way as to be non-responsive to the citizens,
Yeah.
it's troubling.
Okay, there's been a number of school shootings throughout the country.
Not in Massachusetts, though. I mean, we've had
Understood.
2 incidents since Columbine, and just pre-guessing some of your questions here, I will say Massachusetts, I think, has done a good job of trying to avoid these awful situations like what happened in Texas recently.
But my question is, in order to prevent it, or to prevent a major disaster, shouldn't anonymously some teachers or principals in schools be able to carry anonymously, so that if somebody were to come in, and let's face it, whether the door's locked or not, you got a gun, you're getting in. Before anything really disastrous happens, if somebody in the school has a gun, they could solve the problem a lot quicker.
Well, the good news is there already is somebody in schools right now, a school resource officer, or in my case down in Whitman-Hanson, we have a DARE officer, actually has an office in the school classrooms area. So there is somebody that's already on site ready to respond in case of an emergency situation. The problem in Massachusetts right now is that there are some towns that are trying to get rid of those school resource officers
Right.
that are there for that response. And this is part of this whole defund the police, cutting back on law enforcement in certain towns, which I don't agree with to begin with. But secondly, having that person that's in the school that is able to respond immediately, I think, is critical. And it's not just the fact that they can respond to a violent situation there. They are also there. Those resource officers, those DARE officers, are in those schools to help divert kids away from other bad behavior, drug use, gang activity. So I think having somebody in the schools that's able to respond with force is important. Whether it's teachers or not, I'm not necessarily sure. I know there's certain teachers that may not want to
Right.
feel like they handle
Yeah, it
guns.
would have to be with their agreeing to.
You got to be trained.
Yeah,
Right. I think it's
training.
something that's certainly worth more discussion, but I also think that, again, having law enforcement in and around that school environment is a good thing. I ultimately think it also benefits beyond just the safety issues, creating that relationship with students and law enforcement that shows that law enforcement's not the bad guy. For several years now, we've had people in politics try to say that those police officers are bad. We have people with hats that, somebody running for governor right now, one of their staffers was seen on Twitter wearing a hat that said ACAB. That's short for All Cops Are, and then a B word. Okay, that's not helpful to try to move the dialogue about the people who are trying to keep our communities, our homes safe. When something dangerous happens, the first thing we do is call 911. The last thing we want to do is prohibit them from having the resources they need to help our communities respond. So, whether it's in the schools, in our neighborhoods, I want to make sure that law enforcement knows I'm supportive of the work that they're doing, and just again, trying to avoid the long question, I do want to say too, when it comes to school shooting, one of the things that we're talking about now too is the need for more mental health counseling
Right. Exactly.
in advance of having a tragedy like this happen. So, right now, if there's a mental health breakdown with somebody in our state, the two places they can go is the hospital. They get sent to an ER room and they're sedated and they're kept there for several hours, and it's not the right place for them. The other place they'll end up going if they create an incident is maybe they go to the local jail for the night to kind of cool off or whatever. But those are not solutions. We don't have a minute clinic like we have for flu shots or whatever. We don't have that for mental health. We need to expand mental health in our state. Right now, we've centralized a lot of addiction services and mental health in Worcester, but we need to push that back out into certain regions. Cape Cod, they were complaining, because I live down in that area, South Shore, South Coast area, Cape area. They were complaining that when they centralized a lot of the addiction and mental health resources in Worcester, how could loved ones get to and from Worcester? I think what we have to do is get rid of that not in my backyard or that NIMBY feeling, and let the suburbs own some of the recovery centers, whether it's addiction or mental health. Let them be in those neighborhoods, because those kids end up, or adults that end up becoming addicted or have mental health crisis, end up going to big cities for the medications they need or for the treatments they need, and they end up potentially becoming part of a homeless problem, and then that escalates further to, maybe they get into additional problems, legal problems, things like that, crime. So what we want to do is keep them closer to their homes, their families, maybe even their jobs if they're able to work while they're dealing with their mental health or their addiction issues. So I think we have mental health as a major piece of the puzzle over the next decade that we have to really focus on.
No doubt about it. I think one of the things that could be done is to start some kind of a campaign promoting the fact that schools are not gun-free zones. And if you could do that, that might help alleviate some of these people that want to shoot up the schools.
No, you're right. It is strange to think that we promote the fact that there's one place where you can go where nobody is going to be able to defend themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Talking about education, though, before we get to CRT, because I know you get that question, but Metco, why is it that we choose certain kids from the inner city to go to the suburbs instead of teaching the kids in the inner city and making those schools better? We're spending millions of dollars busing kids. They got to get up at 6 in the morning. They don't get home till 8 o'clock at night. That's not
Sometimes
good for
they
the
stay
kids.
overnight with a host family if they've got sports that
Yeah.
evening.
I mean, wouldn't we be better off making the schools in the inner city better?
That's the million-dollar question, or multi-billion-dollar question, of the amount of money we spend every year on education. And right now, Boston Public Schools is in a tailspin. I think they've gone through 5 superintendents over the last 4, 5, 6 years. I mean, they're searching for one new one now. They've had their enrollment decline by over 10,000 students. They're below 50,000 kids right now. They're going the wrong way when it comes to that. Parents are taking their kids and trying to push them out beyond the city. And Metco is sort of supposed to be a release valve for getting some of those kids an opportunity that maybe they weren't getting in Boston schools. So I went on the Metco bus program one morning. I got up early. I toured around where, like you said, parents and kids are getting up very early to get them on the bus. They have to travel a long way to the school. And then again, at night, they're getting home very late. It's tough. Just to give a kid an exposure to a school system that might be able to help them other than the one they're currently in. So my general feeling is that, and I'm a free market person, that our competition provides the best product or service, and it helps push all of our companies, maybe even our public services, in a way that to make them better. And our school system right now does not seem to feel like they need to compete against each other. So one of the things that even Deval Patrick and Charlie Baker has done is to increase the cap on charter schools, saying that kids can, the money can follow the kids from the public school to a private school. I think that's the way we have to go, to create that competition so the schools themselves have to do better and compete more to make sure that the kids are getting exactly what we're paying for.
Agreed.
Right? Now, and as the METCO program goes, like I said, I think it was a release valve. I think, it's sad to think that you have to be on a lottery just to get in there. So it'd be great if we could just make it so that kids can choose where they want to go without having to worry about a lottery, and parents don't have to worry about their kids' future based on the roll of the dice.
And the lottery applies to charter schools as well.
Right.
So if you had more of them, you
Yeah,
wouldn't
we just have to
depend on the
have
lottery.
competition in education. and
Exactly.
It's all there is to it.
Well, I did want to talk a little bit about critical race theory. You and I talked about this once before. And Governor DeSantis down in Florida promoted, and the bill got passed, to get it out of the schools. Now, I know a lot of the schools will say they're not teaching CRT.
Yeah.
But whether it's called CRT or something else, DEI, yeah,
diversity,
same thing.
diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah. Now, would that be something that you would be on board with and promote to get it out of the schools?
It's really frustrating because my daughter is a sophomore at the high excuse me, sophomore in the high school that we're, town we live in, the public school. And in order to play a varsity sport in the fall of this last year and in the winter, she had to watch a video called Implicit Bias, and she had to sign a pledge afterwards accepting the programs in place to alleviate the white privilege that she's being taught that she benefits from. The video itself, called Implicit Bias, explains that white children benefit on the playing fields and in the classrooms, in Massachusetts.
Because of their color.
Because of their color.
Yeah.
My wife and I have done everything we could to raise our kids to be colorblind in the household. It seems that racism is actually being taught to our children more by our schools than by the parents in our
CRT
communities.
teaches racism as
That's
far
right.
as I'm concerned.
That's right. And then the additional thing that I think DeSantis had tried to push out was teaching kids about sexual preference at a very young age, from the kindergarten through first, second, third, sometimes up to fifth grade.
Yeah.
There's a lot of material right now being put in front of children that is, I think, completely age inappropriate when it comes to sexual preference, and really is the role of the parents in the household to be teaching them. I know the birds and the bees talk, I never had it with my two daughters. My wife handled that, okay? And my wife didn't do that until they were, much older.
Until she felt they were
Until
ready.
she felt they were ready, until they felt they were ready.
Yeah.
These young children that are being exposed to,
It's
again,
pornography what they're being
gender
exposed
preferences
to.
is
Yeah.
wrong. So my administration, of course, will not be pushing that type of an agenda. Yeah.
One of the things that really bothers me about education, people tell me Massachusetts is one of the best education states in the country. Being the best at being lousy compared to the rest of the world is nothing to really be proud of. And we're not teaching history, we're not teaching math, we're not teaching English. I used to manage a store where I had a college student. She didn't put the right tender in that somebody gave them. Couldn't figure out how much change to give back to
Financial
the people.
literacy, Elliot, you've hit the nail right on the head. The other thing about what we're failing kids on is financial literacy. They all think that once you graduate, you deserve a free college education, never thinking about the fact that maybe you want to pick a major that's going to actually pay off down the road. Only 25% of American kids actually go on to a 4-year college. A lot of them go into the military or into a trade. Why should 75% of those kids end up subsidizing 25% to pick a major that may or may not end up paying off in the long run to begin with? So, that's my feeling generally on free college, just so you know. I think once you've gotten your basic education from high school, you can earn scholarships. I'm totally for that. In fact, if you serve in the military, the GI Bill is still in place to provide an education for you. So there's a great way to serve your country and serve yourself for the long term. But financial literacy, it's very frustrating right now to see that kids are coming out without really a knowledge about what credit cards are about, about what a mortgage would mean. Why you have to make real hard decisions in life about where you're going to spend your money, what you want to do as a career. So I think that schools should be focused more on the core curriculum that we've always known, and less on ideology and less on thinking about what you should get from the government for free down the road. you
Yeah,
know?
that's a terrible way to do
Well,
things.
we've taken the incentive away from people to work and to learn. People are going to move from first grade to second grade, 11th grade to 12th grade, not because they've learned anything, but because maybe they'll be not feel so good about themselves if they don't make it, as opposed to giving them the incentive to study.
Right, right. And so we've got some work to do. Yes, Massachusetts has been a leader in the country. For a good period of time, we've been a leader internationally as well, but we're finding that especially when it comes to STEM learning, science, technology, engineering, math, we are falling way behind to other countries. China, of course, in India. I think you've got a lot of people coming into our country now being given work visas to do jobs that Americans' kids have not ultimately been educated to be able to fill, and that's a problem.
Well, it's it's a real problem, but that's, in any case, believe it or not, time is almost up.
Oh, all right. That's a half hour.
Things go better. Well, that's just about a
We'll have to do this
hour.
again.
So
Once I'm in office as governor, we'll get back together again.
what I'd like you to do now is tell everybody why they should vote for you for governor.
Okay. Well, I actually served as a state representative from 2010 to 2018. I ran for office when I was 40 years old. I had never been involved in politics before that. And my wife and I own a small business in the town of Hanson. It's a performing arts school. So I was busy helping her with her business. I was working for a sign company as a sales representative. I traveled around the state, around the region, working with retail outlets and different projects for signage. But I just, again, paying the bills and trying to raise two daughters. And so they were 6 and 2 at the time when I ran for office. I was 40 years old in 2010. I ended up winning as a long shot race for state representative. And the reason I tell you that backstory is because once I got to Beacon Hill, I realized that there was a lot of work to do to try to make it more accountable and transparent to the taxpayers. So working on the gas tax in 2014, I thought was a big win to try to push Beacon Hill to be more responsive to the people they're supposed to represent. In 2018, I ran for U.S. Senate against Elizabeth Warren. I felt like the U.S. Senate position should really be focused not so much on finger pointing down in Washington, but actually seeing how Washington can help in Massachusetts. Our fishing industry, the rules that NOAA has on them, really has become restrictive on an industry that's been around for a long, long time. Agriculture, we've got a lot of great farms in central and western Massachusetts that could use help from Washington, D.C., but it seems like our elected officials down in, the congressional and 2 senators are more interested in just finger pointing and blaming, and I think we've seen the division in our country has gotten wider and wider. It's time for someone to focus on the needs of Massachusetts. So in 2018, even though I didn't win that race, I was able to get almost 1 million votes, which is more than the Democratic nominee for governor at the time. And in this election cycle, I learned a lot from that race. I've been able to go out and meet with additional folks to let them know what I stand for, why I want to help Massachusetts grow, make sure that the families have a choice over their education for their kids, make sure that people have healthcare choices that are theirs, not government's. I thought during the pandemic it was wrong to fire state workers if they didn't feel that they should get the vaccine based on underlying health conditions they had, or maybe they were exposed and got natural immunity themselves, but they were getting fired by state government. I thought that was wrong. So I want to make sure that people have the individual freedom and opportunities that everybody should enjoy, not just in Massachusetts, but around the country. And in America, Massachusetts, we're a great state. We have the opportunity to give people a great future. I want to make sure they can afford to live here, stay here, raise their kids, have grandchildren here. If you retire, I don't want you to go to Florida. I want you to stay in Massachusetts. So that's the work I'm going to do for the next 5 months, is to convince people that I'm the right person for the job. And if anybody wants to learn more, they can go to my website, which is jeffdeal.com. And I do have to say, my mother decided to spell my name a little bit uniquely when I was a kid, so it's GeoffDiehl.com to go to that website, and you can learn more about my platform, the work we're doing on the campaign trail if you want to be involved and volunteer, and just in general keep up with what's going on with this election cycle. So thank you very much for having me on.
Well, it
Thank
was
you
a
for
pleasure
coming.
having you, and just so that everybody knows, we have invited your competition,
Great.
both Democrat and Republican. As of now, we have yet to hear from any of your competitors, but they have been invited. We want to give equal time to everybody. We appreciate your time here today. It enlightening.
Great. Great questions, too, by the way. I thank you both.
I enjoyed your answers.
A little bit long, I'm sure.
You did not pull a Barack Obama. We got a heck of a lot more questions in 30 minutes than what they do in over an hour. So we're pleased.
Fair
We're happy.
enough.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.